All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks. Let's just go ahead and jump right into it here. Last week, Ben was talking about the beginning of Matthew chapter 12, and today we're going to be looking at verses 15 through 21 in the Gospel according to Matthew. So our primary audience is the people who have a Jewish background. And if you're living during this time and you have a Jewish background, then you know the Old Testament. You know the prophecies. You know the history of Israel. All right, and you know that the Messiah is coming. And Matthew is written primarily to them. And last week, Ben talked about how in the previous verses, Jesus demonstrated that he was greater than the Sabbath. The Pharisees didn't really like it, and they wanted some debate. And Jesus could have thrown down right then and there. He could have had a big argument right in the middle of the street, but he didn't. He withdrew from a potentially quarrelsome argument in the middle of that street. And then in verse 14, the last one we talked about last week, the Pharisees began thinking about killing Jesus. And thus, that brings us to today's verses, which is Matthew 12, verses 15 to 21, which I'll go ahead and read for you right now. Jesus, aware of this, withdrew from there, and many followed him, and he healed them all. And he ordered them not to make him known. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. Behold, my servant, whom I have chosen, my beloved, with whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel or cry aloud, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not quench, until he brings justice to victory, and in his name the Gentiles will hope. So, to sum up, Jesus heals more people who are following him, and then he sends them on their way and warns them not to share who he actually is. Why does he tell them not to tell? Well, there's a couple of reasons, but one big reason is, in Jesus' life and ministry, folks, every moment has a purpose. Every moment is specifically ordained for that purpose here. And he tells them not to tell because this is not the moment for confrontation. It will come, but this moment is a moment for hope and healing. It's not about quarreling. It's not about arguing. It's not about confrontation here. It's about healing and hope. Jesus was fulfilling prophecy from the Old Testament. Verses 17 to 21 do exactly that. Let's hone in on verse 18 in particular. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not quench. I have to admit, I read that a few times. I'm like, I don't know what that's supposed to mean. So I had to look into it a little bit more, and then I realized it's kind of straightforward here, and it has a couple of meanings. First, think of these people who needed healing. From a medical standpoint, these people were battered. These people were bruised, but not shattered. They were alive, but afflicted. Jesus came to save those who were bruised, not break those who were already battered. So first, it's about individuals and about Jesus' power to restore. That's the first thing. But second, and this is where it gets exciting for me, let's look at the history. School's about to start, and if you don't know, I'm a history teacher. So yes, let's look at the history here. Verses 18 to 21 are fulfilling what was written by the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 42. See, Isaiah was writing during the period known as the divided kingdom, because there were 12 tribes of Israel, King David, King Solomon over the 12 tribes, but then they split up. And then you had the 10 tribes in the north, they were called the kingdom of Israel. And then you had the other 2 tribes in the south, and they were known as the kingdom of Judah. And the problem for these 2 nations of Israel and Judah was they drifted away from God. All right, and that's when the trouble starts here. Things were so bad in 722 BC. You see where Assyria is located, in the capital of Nineveh. They came on in, swept into Israel, took over, and that was that, and the kingdom was done. A few years later, in 586 BC, the Babylonians did the same thing with the southern kingdom of Judah. And it's during these somber and sad and terrible times that Isaiah is writing this. The people have probably lost all hope. And Isaiah is saying, hold on for a second, there is a glimmer of hope. In fact, the next 600 years, there will only be a glimmer of hope. The next 600 years for the Jewish people, not very good at all. In the 500s, 400s, 300s, 200s, 100s, the zeros, until right about the time Jesus is born. It hasn't been that positive here. Israel is very battered, very bruised, but they are not broken. The second half of the verse reinforces this. A smoldering wick he will not put out. Same thing applies here. So we have this fire, this candle, it has the wick on it here, and it's smoldering, which means it's almost gone. The flame is mostly gone. It is as close to being extinguished as you possibly can be, but it's not gone. The fire may almost be gone, but God's not going to put out the flame. Oh, he's had multiple opportunities to wipe Israel away, all right? And he does it almost during this time with the Assyrians, the Babylonians. But again, the flame is not completely put out. An entire people have been nearly wiped out, and they are very bruised. Oh, they are very battered. The wick is very smoldering. But Jesus comes to light that fire again, to make a beaten people strong again, not to break the reed, not to extinguish the fire. So that's our historical background and why Matthew is bringing us back to Isaiah. He was writing it during this time. Nasty time. But now we have a little of the historical background, which helps us understand why these verses are important. So let's switch gears a little bit, all right, and talk a little bit about my personality, because I'm a fairly mild-mannered person. I don't get angry a lot. I don't speak loudly a lot. I rarely speak loudly in anger, but I want to share something with you today. And I am very aware that when I share this with you, it's going to make me seem somewhat silly and perhaps somewhat petty, but we must move forward, and you must be aware of this. There is one time when I do speak loudly and angrily, and it's in the driver's seat of a car. Yeah, you all know what I'm talking about. My goodness. We all have moments of irritation, of exasperation. At least 88% of my irritated moments come in the seat of the driver's seat of a car. And it's not because of driving itself. In fact, if there's no one else on the road, I'm great. But it's specifically the other humans that are on the road, just frustrating me here. They're just driving in their Buick Acadias and just making decisions that I just don't understand. And that is what irritates me so greatly here. To help illustrate, I've taken the liberty of making a top 5 list. Top 5 driving situations that really make me want to shout loudly and angrily in the street. I've added pictures and visual aids from Google Maps to help everyone understand. Number 5. So, the red box is me. All right? So, I hop down to Jordan Creek Mart. I'm taking the loop, the 25-mile-per-hour loop, all right, to hop on a 65-mile-per-hour freeway. Hey, look at those big trucks. And there's a car in front of me. All right? And the car in front of me feels like, oh, I'm going 25. Oh, it's a highway. I should probably speed up. 26, 27, 28. And I am behind him, and these 3 trucks are bearing down, and they're not getting over. I don't know why they're not getting over, but they're not. 28, 29, 30. This is number 5 on the list because I am saying, either mentally loudly or perhaps loudly, go quicker. Go quicker. And that's my number 5. Number 4, you're on the highway. Your cruise is set at 65 miles per hour. There's me. I'm driving 65 miles per hour. That's nice. There's a car that slowly passes you on the left, going 67 miles per hour. And then it gets in front of you in the right lane, which is appropriate, but then what does it do? It slows down. Oh, you all know of what I speak. All right? And you know, it's not like it goes 60. It goes 64.5. And then ever slowly your cruise is creeping, and you know, oh, why did he slow down? It's super annoying. The first one's annoying. This is super annoying. Number 3, you're on a city or suburban road. There's a car that's behind you, and then it gets in the left lane, it passes you, and then gets in front of you, and immediately turns right. Oh yeah, I'm seeing some nodding heads around here. This is number 3, because this is enormously frustrating, because why didn't you just stay behind me? You are flustering me. You are frustrating me so greatly here, and that's number 3. Number 2 isn't necessarily about a person in particular, but this is my morning, all right? University and 92nd Street. This is specifically for me, but I've highlighted, so the actual intersection's upper left. I've highlighted in a lower, right, that big orange box right in the middle here. There's me, and there's a car that's going straight, and I'm stuck behind him at the stoplight. I want to turn right, but I can't because there's no right turn lane, and so I have to wait for 92 seconds. That's like over a minute and a half, 92 seconds, and I am waiting and waiting. And it's amazing that 92 seconds in the scheme of life is nothing, and yet when we're in a car going to work, it seems like everything. All right, and that's the moment where we get frustrated. 92 seconds. And that's my number 2. Number 1, we're going to hold off for a little while, but I want you to be aware of these moments when I'm in the car. And I have 2 kids under 4, so really when I do scream out loudly, I'm not screaming any swear words, and actually I'm trying to keep it as normalized as possible. Oh, I will loudly speak a comment such as, "I do not care for your driving," or "That guy right up there, top-notch driver." All right, biting sarcasm apparently comforts me. But for some reason, when I say those comments, they actually temporarily bring relief. It brings me satisfaction because I just know that the other driver, who's in a separate, soundproof car, many yards away, deep down, can hear what I just said. And he knows that I'm right. Judging by your faces, I know I'm not alone in here in this type of yelling. All right? But it doesn't have to be in the car. Maybe it's at work. Maybe it's at home. Maybe it's at the store. It could be any number of places. But this type of yelling, regardless of what type, where it is, we all do it. If we're angry, if we're passionate about something, if we're admonishing someone, if someone can't hear us or isn't listening here, or if someone needs to know something urgently, we all yell loudly here. And with this in mind, we come to our focus verse of the day, which is verse 19 of Matthew chapter 12. He will not quarrel, nor cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. This prophecy, if you take it literally, seems to indicate that Jesus is not going to be talking at all, because it says no one will hear him in the streets. But I'm pretty sure Jesus talked in the streets, so we can't take it literally. We have to go deeper and figure out what we're looking at here. And for Jesus, there's 2 different types of voices in the street. The first voice is the one we know Jesus for, the sharing the good news about the kingdom of God. Yes, it's loud. Think Sermon on the Mount. He had to be very loud, very passionate. And yes, this voice number 1 is loud. It's passionate, but it's all about serving God and spreading the kingdom of God. Isaiah, in this verse, is not talking about voice number 1. He's talking about voice number 2. That's the voice that he's talking about. The voice of a rude, a threatening, an angry, or a hostile person ready for a verbal confrontation, maybe even a physical battle. Voice 2 is the wrestler that says, "Bring it on." Voice 2 is Russell Crowe in the middle of the Coliseum shouting, "Are you not entertained?" That is voice number 2. Voice 1 and voice 2, they're both loud, they're both passionate, but voice number 2 does not glorify God at all. Remember, Isaiah is speaking to the kingdom of Judah just before it was conquered by the Babylonians. The book of Matthew brings this verse up as a prophecy, a reminder that Jesus is going to come and establish a new justice. But when he comes, he won't be bringing a sword to demolish the Babylonians or the Assyrians. He won't be leading a crowd of people shouting down the street, quarreling down the street, crying in the street, yelling at others to get out of the way. Oh, I'm sure the Jewish people would have loved that. They're under the Romans at this time. They would love to get the Romans out. They would love for Jesus to give a huge voice number 2, a shouty voice, an angry voice, a voice with power behind it. Physical, like battling power, sword power. But that's not going to happen. Matthew is conveying a simple message right here. Jesus is not going to cry out or raise his voice in the streets in that way. He's not going to use that voice number 2, that angry, loud, worldly voice to share his message. He's going to build people up. In fact, his voice, that first voice, the positive one, the spreading the kingdom of God voice, that's the voice Jesus is going to use. And it's Jesus being Jesus. That's what's going on there. And then it kind of hits you. We all raise our voices every day. We get passionate about something every day. We get loud about something every day. And how often are we raising our voice, getting passionate with our voice for the kingdom of God? We shout loudly at a computer if it's not doing what we want. We shout at a stoplight. We don't get the good parking spot at the store. Or someone's not listening and we're upset. We get passionate about foolish things. We proclaim, we declare, we shout about foolish things. Foolish, worldly things are our passion. And we're the ones who are supposed to spread the kingdom of God when the things we're most passionate about is turning right at a stoplight and having to wait for 92 seconds? When we look in the Bible, we ask the question, who are the shouters in the Bible? Who are some of the shouters for the kingdom of God? Where are the declarers? Who are the proclaimers? Who are these people and what are they shouting about? I got 3 people for you. Number 1, Elijah. Elijah in the Old Testament in 1 Kings says, there's going to be a drought, and there's a drought. He shouts, there's going to be rain, and there's rain. And he does all of this in the face of King Ahab, who was a nasty king. Elijah destroys Baal right in front of the king. And Ahab had a wife. His name was Jezebel. And she was a piece of work. And Jezebel loved Baal. And Elijah's doing this all in her face. He proclaims God boldly in an absolute terrible place and time. Number 2, Jonah. Yes, that Jonah. Get the whale, get the fish and everything. I'm talking about the second time. After he actually does decide to go to Nineveh. All right? The word of the Lord came to Jonah and said a second time, arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out the message that I tell you. And he goes, and he walks into the city of Nineveh, and he shouts, follow God. And they do. He proclaims boldly in the face of the Assyrians, the people who are going to conquer Israel. And number 3, Paul. Paul goes to present-day Greece, present-day Turkey. He walks around. He shouts the gospel all the time. He shouts the message of Jesus. In Acts chapter 14, the priest of Zeus, the head of the Greek pantheon of gods, the priest of Zeus is getting ready for some sacrifices. And Paul says, wait. Don't do this. Don't do this, guys. There's a better way. There's a new way. And it's Jesus. And he shouts that. The people get mad. And they stone him. He'll survive the stoning, and what does he do? He goes to a new city and shouts the message of God. These are your proclaimers. These are your shouters. Elijah had a death sentence placed on him by Jezebel. Jonah was so scared of the Assyrians, he actually ran away at first. Paul shouted the message to a crowd of Zeus supporters in Greece. These are your guys who are using that first voice, the righteous voice, to proclaim the message of God in frightening territory sometimes. And so are we shouters of the message of God? Are we proclaimers of the kingdom of God? Are we shouting the gospel of Jesus? If not, why aren't we? Why haven't you? Why didn't you yesterday or the day before? Oh, you've proclaimed stuff. You've shouted stuff this week. No, you have. I have. Was it about Jesus? Have you been proclaiming in that first voice, the voice of Jesus? Or was it in that second, more belligerent voice? I know that my voice was heard this past week. I know very specifically because now we come to number 1 on my list. I'm on a city or a suburban road. I'm about 100 yards from the green light, and there's me, and I'm following this yellow car right here. We're both going straight. We're approaching a stoplight. We're 100 yards away. The light is green. And so the speed limit's 35. We're going 35, and the car in front of me looks up, sees the green light. 100 yards away and begins to slow down. Begins to slow down as though he's assuming the light's going to turn red. Well, I'm probably not going to make this. I better slow down. It's green. All right? And naturally, then he slows down. The light does turn yellow and red. We have to stop there. When if he had just stayed at the regular speed, we both would have made it and everyone would have been happier. And I am left in the car behind. Kids in the back or not, but I shout, "It's like you don't even want to make the light!" Why didn't your parents tell you you can do it when you were growing up? The other 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, I don't shout as much. My wife Kelsey can attest that number 1, it always gets a shout from me. Why aren't you going for it here? And what happened right there is astonishing. There's a dude in front of me who simply has no interest in making this light. And I encourage him with more passion and more urgency than the way I do when sharing Jesus. And it's not just level of passion, it's the number of times. The number of times that I shout at someone in the car versus the number of times that I even say something about Jesus to somebody. It's astonishing because it's not close. How many of us shout worldly things much more than the most important thing in life, which is Jesus Christ, the Son of God? So what do? How do we change? Why do we change? And like usual, the answer is Jesus. When Jesus came, people were waiting for Jesus. This one guy, Joseph of Arimathea, he's been waiting for Jesus to come. This guy, Nicodemus, he's been waiting for the Messiah. People like Paul, who was mistaken at first, but then earned redemption from Jesus himself and spread the message of Jesus to the Gentiles and the Jews. Folks, back then, there were people who were waiting for Jesus. And thus we come to our final verse here in verse 21. And in his name, the Gentiles will hope. People today are waiting for Jesus. Oh, they may not realize it, but they are. People today in 2015 in the United States of America, some people who haven't even heard of Jesus, even though we're living in America in 2015, they're waiting for Jesus, even if they don't realize it. Make a little mental list right now of a couple times that you've passionately spoken about something this summer. Were any of those times about Jesus? Or was it that belligerent wrestler voice number 2 rather than the voice of Jesus like number 1? Isaiah said that Jesus wouldn't cry out in the streets, causing quarrelsome hostilities here, and prophecy was fulfilled. Jesus used voice 1, the voice of love. Jesus didn't use voice 2, the voice of me yelling at a stoplight. That's voice 2. Voice 2 is no good. When we use voice 2 more than voice 1, we're doing the opposite of what Jesus did. We're running away from being Christ-like. It's about attitude, it's about priorities, it's about loving other people. It's about them knowing us by our works, by our fruit, by our words. Ben Foose said last week, either you're speaking the truth through God or you are lying. There's no in between. But I'm asking you, what if we aren't speaking at all? What if the things we are saying forcefully, zealously, don't matter at all once our time on earth is over? What if we are willfully ignoring saying things about Jesus? Hopefully this message has given you something to think about, but most importantly today, it's about your relationship with Jesus Christ, your relationship with God. We want you to have a strong relationship with God and Jesus. And you know what? We all have stuff to work out. We all have troubles. We're none of us perfect here. But the grace of God is an amazing thing. And this week, I want to encourage you to share that message of amazing grace with someone else. Share it passionately. Share it fervently. Share it zealously. And I'll work on it too. Hey, I need to work on it too. We all do. And as we're working on this week, if I see you on the road, I'll be sure to smile, give you a thumbs up, and secretly hope that we both can make that light.
You stand and sing with us, please.